Hey, so in this video, I'm going to show you the process that I used to modify my one-piece fiberglass kayak paddle to adjust the feather angle. There are kits out there that allow you to do this in a more professional manner, however, they cost money, and I wanted to see how cheaply I could do this since this was a free-to-me kayak paddle. So the overall process is you get your kayak paddle, you cut it in half, you bond a dowel in there, you put the other half on, you adjust it to the feather angle that you want, you bond everything together, you wrap the outside in fiberglass with resin. Once that's set, you sand it down, and then you apply a top coat of either paint or some additional clear coat, something like that, so that you don't have any exposed fiberglass and get the itchy hands. But that's it. Overall, for me, it worked out pretty good. The cost was not so bad. I think I paid less than $30 total in materials. It took me about a day of, mostly waiting for the resin or the epoxies to set. And then in the end, I have some footage of me using it out on the river. Worked out great for me, and I'm hoping this will help someone out there. The first step would be to cut your kayak paddle in half. I forgot to film that, so you'll have to use your imagination. Once it's in half, you need to find a suitable dowel rod that will fit snugly inside. The chances that you'll find one off the shelf that will fit snugly are pretty much slim. So what I did was I bought a slightly oversized, for me it was 1 1/8, which I got from Ace Hardware, and then I modified the outer diameter using the very unsafe method you're about to see. So I'm pretty sure this is how people die, but I've made a lathe with a socket that I kind of jammed on the end of this piece of dowel, and thanks to this flappy disc grinder, I'm going to lose an eye. All right, and permanent hearing damage as well. Not shown here is that I drilled a hole in the end of that dowel rod, and there was a nail sticking out of that wall, which served as the perfect tail stop for this. Once I got that dowel to size and I made sure it fit in both ends of the paddle, I decided to drill out the inside to shave a little weight off of there. Probably not needed. Speaking of unsafe, absolutely don't do this. But what I'm doing here is I'm grooving the dowel so that there's more area for the epoxy adhesive to kind of settle in. And now with a freshly grooved rod, I'm applying the epoxy and bonding it into the first half of the paddle. Make sure to only bond it into one side first. Don't try to do them both at the same time. So to figure out the feather angle on this, basically I sat down and just kind of like paddled and twisted this unglued side with the other one until I found what felt like the normal amount of rotation in my body. That's it. I marked it. I measured it. It's around 46 degrees, which is a little more than the 30 that I thought I was going to probably end up with. But it's what feels most comfortable for my body. So I'm going to go ahead and glue the sucker up now. So now that the two halves are bonded back together, I'm cutting out a piece of the fiberglass mat here. My aim was to get 2 wraps of the fiberglass mat around there. If you would prefer, you can do 3 wraps for additional strength. 2, I thought, would be sufficient given the fact that the dowel rod's already bonded to the inside diameter. I just make sure that the epoxy isn't tacky before you start this process, or it'll start pulling it apart like you see here. Next up was the beginning of the resin infusion process. So I mixed up a batch and I just started spreading it on as you see here. So the lessons I learned here are: do not use a 5-minute epoxy. That's not enough pot life for you to actually complete this job before everything goes quite poorly. So definitely aim for a 30-minute epoxy if you can. Find it available. If you can't, then I would just do this in single wraps at a time instead of aiming for the double wrap all at the same go like I did. Also make sure to overmix your resin, as in make too much resin than what you think you'll need, as opposed to having too little, as what happened to me. And then I had to mix up a batch halfway through, which means I had even less working time than anticipated. The other one would be to, as you see here, eventually I'll be pushing it in with my thumb, essentially working the resin into the mat of the fiberglass, because you want the resin to go all the way through. And so you get this sort of clearish, translucent look in the places where you have full penetration of the resin into the mat, which is what you're aiming for. And once the epoxy set, I just reviewed it. Everything looked okay. We got reasonable infusion of the resin in the fiberglass. Of course, it could have been much better if I had used a slower setting epoxy, but overall it looked pretty good. So the next step after that is sanding. I opted for a wet sanding technique using a what is this, a sponge, sandpaper sponge, because I absolutely hate ingesting or inhaling fiberglass dust. Is really bad stuff. Really recommend wet sanding. No matter how much I sanded, it was not enough. So just keep sanding. Eventually, you'll get to where you want to be. You want to get all of the rough fibers that are sticking out essentially trimmed down. After sanding and drying, the results are what you see here. Overall, they're pretty good. I decided to give it an actual performance test in the condition that you see it in, which resulted in me getting fiberglass all over my arms and a restless night as I kept scratching. So don't be me. Do the smart thing. Definitely give it a top coat before the first time you use it. And here's my paddle in action after I gave it a coat of white paint. It worked splendidly as I used it, and I had a great time with it. I hope this works out for you as well as it worked out for me.